I'm going to talk about Japanese Pure Land Buddhism. Japanese Pure Land Buddhism has been one of the most, if not the most, popular forms of Buddhism in Japan. One of the reasons that it's hard to calculate that is because, as I mentioned in the Zen lecture, many people who practice Pure Land Buddhism, or Shin Buddhism as it's called, also practice some elements of Zen, and many people who practice some elements of Zen also practice some elements of Pure Land. And again, they complement each other very well. D.T. Suzuki, the great Japanese scholar who brought an understanding of Japanese religion to the West early in the 20th century, mainly with writings on Zen. He was just as likely to refer to himself as a Pure Land Buddhist or Shin Buddhist as a Zen Buddhist, although most Americans who are familiar with Suzuki would just be shocked by that and say, no, of course he's a Zen Buddhist. Well, one of my own teachers, Taitetsu Uno, who I've mentioned quite often, I realize, was himself a student of D.T. Suzuki and was encouraged to study Buddhism to become to the point of becoming a priest by D.T. Suzuki. So I got lots of good stories about D.T. Suzuki, some of which I may share. Jodo Shinshu. Honen was the teacher of Shinran. Shinran is the teacher who was most formulative for what we today would call Jodo Shinshu, or Japanese Pure Land. Honen was a Tendai dropout. And unlike Dogen, who was unhappy with the elitism, Honen just said, I can't do this. This is too difficult. I have to find some other path. Shinran describes his own motivations as dropping out of Tendai very, very similarly. I can't do this. This is not a path that I am actually able to do. I'm not fit for this kind of rigor. Okay, so what do we do? Well, Honen developed a Pure Land practice. Shinran was the student of Honen, and he elaborated it further. Okay, the practice is centered around the Nembutsu. Nembutsu is the phrase Namu Amida Butsu, which is repeated not like a mantra. It's not supposed to have any evocative or powers or make anything manifest or whatever. The way that it's often understood within Jodo Shinshu is Namu is my ego-trapped, foolish self, stumbling around in the dark, inadvertently hurting myself, inadvertently hurting others. Amida is infinite light, infinite life. Butsu, the Buddha nature, okay? Namu Amida Butsu. What does that mean? It's not Namu Amida Butsu, it's Namu Amida Butsu. It is the dark that gives definition to the light. The darkness of my ego makes it possible for me to see the light of infinite compassion and infinite life. The limits of the boundaries of my own foolish self are exactly what delineate for me, this light, this celestial light, if you will. Namu Amida Butsu, the first time, the way it's often described, the first time that you say Namu Amida Butsu and really say it, just repeating the phrase, it's not magic words, repeating the phrase is going to help. The first time you really say Namu Amida Butsu, with your full foolish self and the full light of Amida, it's likened to a burp. Okay? Why? Well, because a burp just comes deep from within you and just wells up of its own power. And that's like Namu Amida Butsu. Also, comparing it to a burp shows something about Shin Buddhism, and that is Shin Buddhism doesn't like pompousness. It doesn't like pretense. It doesn't like being very formal. It likes being very real. Namu Amida Butsu can be seen as the whole practice. There are sutras that are chanted, there are rituals, there are ceremonies, there are holidays, and so forth and so forth. What does it all get down to? Namu Amida Butsu. All of that stuff is just stuff. What really has to happen is I accept myself just as I am with all my limitations, all of my foolishness, all of my ego, and I am embraced by the infinite light of boundless compassion. Okay? This is a practice that was very, again, very democratic, very egalitarian. You can recite Namu Amida Butsu as you're working in your rice fields, as you're chopping wood, as you're laboring at anything. You can recite Namu Amida Butsu. Namu Amida Butsu can come up whenever it's appropriate, whenever it's especially appropriate. There are all kinds of stories about people showing themselves at their very worst and following it with Namu Amida Butsu. Tai told a story, Phi110 told a story about when his grandmother, when he was very little, his grandmother answered the door, and there was some sort of door-to-door salesperson at the door, and he heard his grandmother yelling at the guy and slammed the door, came stomping back into the kitchen. Namu Amida Butsu, Namu Amida Butsu. That son of a bitch. Namu Amida Butsu. And Tai said, Grandma, what's going on? Namu Amida Butsu. Oh, that's some bastard who goes door to door trying to bilk old people. Namu Amida Butsu. Well, when do you need this? Right? Your anger is bubbling over. Your resentment's bubbling over. All your negative emotions are bubbling over. That's exactly when you need this, to realize all of that is Namu. But Namu is defined by Amida Butsu. Okay? A friend of mine said that she was driving her son to school. He was in the back seat, and she was getting very angry at the way way other people were driving, was beginning to out loud complain about them and get angrier and angrier. And finally, her son leaned forward from the back seat and said, "Mom, Namu Amida Butsu." She said, and I said, "Not now!" Well, of course, both of those are perfectly appropriate, both the Namu Amida Butsu and the realizing, you know what, I'm not in the mood for Namu Amida Butsu. That's when I most need Namu Amida Butsu, when I'm not in the mood for it. Not when I'm sitting with incense and, candlelight and, group of people who have just been chanting with me, Namu Amida Butsu. No, forget that. No, it's when you're having road rage that you most need Namu Amida Butsu. Okay? So, the first time is like a burp, and after that, when you recite Namu Amida Butsu, it is gratitude. You've had something, I think, equivalent to Satori, although it's not talked about that way. You've had this breakthrough, or Kensho for that matter. You've seen something about your true nature. You've had this little opening to the light, and you're grateful for that. And because you're grateful for that, you repeat Namu Amida Butsu. Okay? Shinjin is true and trusting. What does that mean? It means an understanding that my ego is so limited and so weak, my ego cannot enlighten me. Other power is what? Other power is compassion itself. When I can let go and let boundless compassion flow through me, become the instrument of boundless compassion, Namu Amida Butsu, that's Shinjin. I'm entrusting myself to other power, not to self-clinging, not to this idea of myself as being a better person or a good person or an enlightened person or this, that, or the other thing, because basically that's just the ego finding ways to trick itself into thinking that it's something other than the ego. Remember in the story of the enlightenment of Siddhartha Gautama is almost at the point of enlightenment when he finally sees his real enemy, and it's himself. And his own image says to him, "You have come further than anyone else. I will make you my God." And Siddhartha says, "Carpenter, you will never build this house again." Okay? In other words, nope. Namu Amida Butsu. No, sorry. No foothold for here. The ego is just the ego. I accept the ego with compassion. Thich Nhat Hanh, who is a contemporary Vietnamese Buddhist, Zen Buddhist teacher, he says when you have anger, when you have jealousy, when you have fear and so forth, act as if it's an infant crying in the middle of the night. What would you do? Would you get up and hold the infant compassionately and gently calm the infant? That's what you do with your own anger, your own jealousy, your own ferociousness. That is very similar to a lot of Jodo Shinshu teaching. Yeah, I don't hate my ego for being what it is. I accept it with compassion, which means that I accept everyone's egos as being just their ego, and I embrace it with compassion. That also allows you to recognize myokonin. What is myokonin? A seemingly ordinary person who nevertheless is a deeply spiritual presence, okay? An embodiment of Namu Amida Butsu. An ordinary person may not be very learned, may not be doing some kind of meditation, may not be extremely articulate, but nevertheless embodies Namu Amida Butsu. I accept that I am a limited, foolish being, but I also have true and trusting that the power of compassion works through me. When I was at a meditation retreat, a hermitage in Sri Lanka, there was one monk who was always running around, cleaning, cooking, serving people tea, this sort of thing, always with a big smile on his face. He's the one who got up and rang the bell in the morning to wake us all up. But he never sat and meditated with us. I asked our teacher once, isn't, I don't remember the monk's name, but isn't Bhante whatever going to be sitting with us at any of these times? And my teacher just smiled a little, shook his head and said, no, he doesn't meditate, he can't sit still. A Theravadan monk who can't sit still, how does he practice? Well, it's obvious how he practices. He embodies this continual giving, this joyful giving to everyone else. That's something like the notion of myokonin, although normally in myokonin would just be an ordinary person, a field worker, a factory worker, whomever. I think we've probably all known someone like that in our lives. At least I hope you have. I know I have. Who just embodies something profoundly wise, but never thinks of himself or herself as being a wise person. It's just, I am fully as I am, and compassion just naturally flows through me. It's another part of Jodo Shinshu teaching is everyone needs to be able to say, I am a foolish being. Of course I'm a foolish being. Okay? We want to be able to admit, I am a foolish being, and that's not running yourself down or whatever, that's just simply compassionately saying, of course. I'm deluded by ego, of course I'm caught in my karmic limitations because I am a foolish being. But there is a non-duality between my foolishness and Amida Buddha. Okay? I have to give up self-power, which means any striving that's, the ego thinking that it can enlighten itself, notions of being a better person or whatever. Does that mean, I don't want to be a better person? Does that mean I won't be charitable? Does that mean I won't be honest or whatever? No, you be honest for the sake of being honest. You are charitable for the sake of being charitable. Indeed, Shinran was widely known for taking in the poor, people who were outcasts, people who had various mental or physical disabilities, and who were shunned by general society for that reason, taking them in and treating them as his equals. Okay? Jesus hung out with prostitutes and tax collectors, Stephen Colbert put it, and no modern conservative would ever be caught hanging out with a tax collector. Well, yeah, it's basically, can I really honestly, not putting on a pretense, but really honestly see these people as being my equals? It's one thing that people, I think, really like about Pope Francis, the current Pope when I'm making this film, is that he seems to have a certain humility. I mean, if appearances are accurate, he seems to have a certain humility where he does see the poor and the outcast and the disrespected and the people of the world who are suffering as being his equals. There's a difference between compassion and pity. Pity means I see myself as being superior to you and I feel sorry for you. Compassion means I feel your suffering as my own. I don't feel myself better than you. I may be a little luckier than you. If I'm a little luckier, if I have a little extra, I should share it with you because, we are the same kind of being. We're all foolish beings. And that is the expression, if you will, of gratitude. Famous Jedo Shinshu poem written by a woman who was a worker in the sugarcane fields in Hawaii. Many Japanese came over to Hawaii to work in the sugarcane fields and in the coffee plantations and so forth. She wrote, "Awakening this morning, heart filled with gratitude, I vow to stop complaining. Then realize this vow is a complaint. And this gratitude, it is a lie, it is a lie, it is a lie. But Namu Amida Butsu." Okay? In other words, this very desire to stop complaining and be more grateful is a realization that I'm complaining, that I'm not grateful, that there's something about the situation that I take as being wrong. Am I judging it? Am I striving with self-power to be better? Am I simply letting compassion flow? Okay? There's a difference between saying I'm going to have a better ego and saying, you know what, really the ego is the problem. Breathe and let go. Sometimes spoken of this way, the ice of ego melts to become the waters of compassion. Ice is cold and hard. Water is flowing, dynamic, and sustains life. What melts that ice and makes it into water? Amida, infinite light. But that infinite light is not my achievement. It doesn't come from my ego. I have to open myself to it. How do I open myself to it? It flows through me. Namu Amida Butsu. It comes to me. It calls to me. When I call Namu Amida Butsu, that's Amida calling to me. A great poem that I think sums up a whole lot about Jedo Shinshu Buddhism comes from a Japanese poet named Issa. It's a well-known poem. This world of dew is just a world of dew, and yet. He wrote that on the occasion of the birth, or the death of his young daughter. He had lost several children at early ages, but when his daughter died, I think that was the fourth of his children to die at a very young age, he wrote this poem. This world of dew is just a world of dew, and yet. World of dew, well, the dew appears bright in the morning and then it vanishes, it evaporates fairly quickly. It doesn't last. This world of dew is just a world of dew. That's Buddhism 101, impermanence, anicca, dukkha, anatta. But then this tagline makes it Jedo Shinshu, and yet, I have a human heart. My infant daughter just died. I know that this is a world of dew. I know everything is impermanent, but my daughter just died, and I still have a human heart. I am fully human. We may all be Buddhas in our true nature, but I am still also fully human. What kind of monster would I be if I had no grief? I would either have to be fully enlightened, which I'm not, or I would have to be less than fully human to have no grief at the death of my daughter. So the non-duality of these, this really embraces Namu Amida Butsu, non-duality between the Namu and Amida Butsu. Wonderful poem. Taitetsu Uno was a fully ordained Shin Buddhist priest, and he was leading a group of Americans on a tour of temples and so forth in Japan. And a woman walked up to him and said, "So you're a Buddhist priest?" And he said, "Yep." She said, "Well, do you meditate?" He said, "Nope." "Well, do you do yoga?" "Nope." "Well, what do you do?" He said, "Nothing." "Nothing?" I think I need to study with you. Okay? Now, this is sometimes called the easy path because you don't sit for hours in meditation, you don't learn yoga postures, you don't memorize sutras. On the other hand, there's something really ironic about calling it the easy path. What does it really mean? It means that every moment of your life is your practice. Everyday life is your practice. Embodying compassion and gratitude in every moment of your life, that's your practice. Wow, that's a lot harder than sitting for 20 minutes of meditation twice a day or going 2 days a week to a yoga class, isn't it? But in the end, if you can't do that, the other stuff isn't worthwhile at all. So it's the easy path, but it is an all-consuming path. A Japanese priest, until I taught this course, I didn't realize how many Japanese priests I actually have known, but I keep mentioning them. A Japanese priest named Sato told a story about how he, after he graduated from the University of Tokyo, I believe it was, went to see D.T. Suzuki, who was still living, although quite elderly. Suzuki was living, he had a small room and he was fiddling with a charcoal brazier. And Reverend Sato came in and introduced himself, and he said Suzuki didn't look up, he just kept fiddling with a charcoal brazier. And finally Suzuki said, "Well, why are you here?" Well, I've just graduated with my doctorate in Buddhist studies, and I'm an ordained Jodo Shinshu priest. And Suzuki said, "Well, what are you going to do with all that?" Well, I hope to contribute to preserving and spreading the tradition. And Suzuki, still not looking up, just kept fiddling with his brazier and said, "Well, what are you doing here then? You better get to work." And finally Suzuki looked up and looked him right in the eye and said, "Just be Namu Amida Butsu." Wow. Powerful, huh? Okay. What are you here visiting me for? Look, just be Namu Amida Butsu. Embody this. Or rather, let it embody you. Because if I say embody it, it sounds like I'm saying, this is something your ego is going to accomplish. Nuh-uh. Your ego is going to, at some point, let go. In a manner probably not unlike the old man in the Taoist parable who fell into the river. He said, "I just let the river carry me." Well, in this case, the river is the waters of boundless compassion, and you just let them carry you. So, Jodo Shinshu is very appealing to ordinary people. They can practice it. They can practice it and go about their ordinary lives. It is interesting, though, that although Jodo Shinshu is the largest established Buddhist institution in Japan, it has been steadily hemorrhaging membership. Its numbers have been steadily, slowly but surely dwindling. In the United States, the Buddhist Churches of America, they basically lost, by their own numbers, lost 90% of their membership since the 1970s. Well, why did that happen? Well, for a number of reasons. One of which is the failure to appeal to younger people. The failure to take it to the streets, as Americans like to say. And the confusion about, well, is this about Namu Amida Butsu, or is this about trying to be Japanese, learning Japanese cooking, Japanese flower arranging, using Japanese words for everyday objects and so forth? What is it we're trying to do here? Well, we have a young people's group. They had a young people's committee, and the average age was, I think, 45. That's the problem. Really, that is the problem, the failure to make this dynamic. When Americans discover Jodo Shinshu and they discover what it's about, usually they're very enthusiastic and they find it very resonant. Yes, I am a foolish being. Okay, wow. I don't have to feel guilty about being a foolish being. I am a foolish being, so is everyone else, and Namu Amida Butsu. carry the compassion into everyday life. There is no secret handshake. There is no secret practice. There is just compassion in everyday life, compassion and gratitude in everyday life. Interestingly, Buddhism in the United States, this is a good time to mention it, has been on a steady rise since the mid-20th century. There are, I believe, something like 4 times the number of people in the United States right now who identify themselves as Buddhists as there were, say, 50 years ago. And in that same amount of time, the number of Buddhist centers in the United States has grown tenfold. Now, that's a huge interest, okay? I used to be part of a group that for about 4 or 5 years in a row held a festival in Northampton affiliated with Smith College called the Many Flavors of Buddhism, in which we invited all the Buddhist groups in the Pioneer Valley in this particular region to send representatives, to have information tables, workshops, public presentations, performances when they had, when they had performance groups and so forth. Opened that up to the public. It was supposed to be for dialogue between the Buddhist groups and also just, exposure to the public. There were over 50, in just this small area, there were over 50 different Buddhist organizations while we were doing this. A scholar noted that in the Pioneer Valley, which is this area in Massachusetts, Connecticut, a little north, a little east and west. In the Pioneer Valley, pretty much every major school of Buddhism that has ever existed is being practiced. And they're talking to each other. And he noted with astonishment in his voice, that is the first time in history that has ever happened. This situation has never existed before. Every school of Buddhism working together, talking to each other, coexisting. Well, and of course many Americans don't even know that there are different kinds of Buddhism. And I like to start off with people who don't know anything about Eastern traditions by telling them there are as many different kinds of Buddhism as there are kinds of Protestant Christianity. Lots and lots and lots, and some of them disappearing, some of them new ones being formed, and so forth. Great diversity, but it's incredible the richness of that diversity right here in the area in which I live. In fact, one scholar from the University of Hawaii said that he was in Japan. Just to loop this back together, he was in Japan, and some people who were administrators in large Buddhist institutions were talking to him about how the young people didn't seem to be interested and how their numbers are dwindling and how they feared that, that eventually Buddhism would become very weak and would perhaps even vanish. And they asked him, what do you think we ought to do? And he said, I told them, look to the east. Northampton, Massachusetts. Well, not by way of soft congratulations, but just by way of saying we have incredible opportunity in the area where I'm living, where most of the people who will be students in this course are living. We have incredible opportunities. Avail yourself of them.